may not be on. So. It's like
I'm
the,
getting text messages from
Thank you.
it's like the United Nations.
Okay.
I don't know.
So now that we solved the rental problem, let's move on.
I'm sure everybody took notes and got everything we said.
In conclusion,
That's right.
So, Scott, why don't you just kind of give an update with the
The tool?
software that's being
Yeah,
worked on and where we are with that.
the tool is ready to use. We've got the data that's been provided in the tool. And I think that Dave and Steve, you guys have been looking at the validity of the data within the tool that we've received. And I think you said you found minimal, some variances, but the data appear to be in pretty good shape overall. Is that a fair assessment? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few
Anomal-
dozen plus or
anomalies.
minus on each spreadsheet that need to be cleaned up, but it's probably easier to clean up once we get to clean it up in a bunch of Excel spreadsheets is going to be
Right.
complicated. So once we get the database working is probably the right time to address the cleanup a little bit. But there wasn't much out of whack that I saw.
So
15, 20, 30 on
directionally,
each
it's
spreadsheet
Yeah.
out of 4,000.
That's pretty
So,
good.
right.
So the challenge we've had is it is ready to use, and we're inside a what I would call a very highly secure, kind of firewalled environment that is not conducive for a public access. It can VPN into it and all that kind of stuff. And what we have done is we're getting a box, a server to put the application on outside of that environment so that the public and us can easily access it without going through all kinds of security levels. And the hardware is on its way, but with the supply chain situation, we've got a little bit of delay in the delivery. So what we can do optionally is set up some user time, but it's going to have to be sort of an escorted situation for the commissioners to get in. We can do a couple hour sessions, however you want to do it. So the tool's ready, it does work, it's accessible, but it's not accessible in a public environment. And what the timeline or the expectation is that should be corrected. The hardware should be received. Everything should be set up if the current timelines are adhered to by the end of October, or possibly earlier. But I'm just going to put it out there by the end of October for public consumption. So we just got to decide if we want to set up some interim use sessions between now and then. Happy to do that.
So what does that kind of,
like
how do you envision there being on assistance given? I mean, would it be people send one of us the query or the analysis they want done and one of us does it? Or would it be somebody physically sitting in a room with somebody?
No, we could do it that way, but probably the most efficient way would be, I know Steve and Dave, you and myself sat on that demo situation. We could do a very similar situation where, the folks that are developing and using this or operating it can run it for us. We can basically just come to the session with queries that we want to see or metrics that we want them to show, and they can basically do the work for us right there. Or, it'd be very simple. And if we wanted to have some predetermined things, questions that we wanted to be answered, like say we wanted to say, we want to know the density of rental properties, primary residence, second homes within this part of the island. We can send that in and they can have it ready by the time we get there. Those are pre-canned queries. So if we wanted to predefine, maybe one of the things we could do is, in order for us to come to conclusion, what are the kinds of information that we're going to be looking for? What are the metrics and measures we're going to be wanting to see? We can define that, and that can easily be queried. So and then once the system is in public, we can do it ourselves. I don't know if any questions on that, or was that?
No, I think
It'd be a similar session like what we had.
Yeah.
Only we could come there with what is it that we want them to show us.
I mean, it would seem to me as though each query will take them a little bit of time and that just a written description of the query sent to them that we could,
do that too. I mean, the query itself, once we have it defined, as I think you guys saw in the demo, we just plug it in. Yeah. And
I guess
hit
it
the
does
button and
take
it
a little
goes.
bit of feedback for them to say, well, no, we don't have that in the data, to kind of talk through what we want versus what's in the database that they can actually generate, because it may be that can't give you exactly what you're asking for, but they can give you something close, I guess.
Ultimately, what's the deliverable or goal here? When you say public access, you're saying any member of the public will be able to go on and just log into an open website and say, whatever, I want to know how many rental houses there are on my street, on X street. You know, similar to what you can, you know, that like the Charleston County tax record is open. Anyone go in there anytime. Is that what we're shooting for? That anyone go in anytime?
That's what would be set
Okay.
up. Yeah.
Like Zillow or, you
Right.
know, yeah, any of these that maps things and
Okay.
shows history over time. I think it'd be great. I mean, it's gonna be really useful, I think, to everybody. Kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, and I apologize for the delay. I just don't have control over the supply chain right now.
I guess my ask is, not being familiar with what's been developed, even where to start to begin to ask some questions to, you know, get some answers.
Well, do we want to set up Sandy, I'd like to have, I mean, I think the people that haven't seen it, once you see it, you'll be very familiar with it because it's going to have a little bit of a look and feel like the MLS kind of system.
Mhm.
So it's very, it's user friendly as far as if you want to define a question, it can be mapped out pretty quick and you just enter
Okay.
with your filters.
All right.
So, yeah, I mean, maybe the next step would be to have a demo session or a little training or, orientation session with the planning commissioners. That'd be,
You know, it's been a while since we worked with it, and I guess a key piece of information is what's been loaded into it. And I honestly, I know that the current rental license stuff is in there. But does it
When-
go, it
when
doesn't
you
go
say-
back in
When you
time.
say current, you mean up until this most recent
Right,
subscription period,
That's
which I'm
correct.
looking at? That's
Yes.
like, when does that end?
so to that
It
point,
starts again, too.
July 1, everything expired and then we started this renewal process whereby, and this happens to be in the middle of an odd year where we're aligning with a new state law in terms of the timing on all business licenses. So we've done a shortened period license that we're in the middle of right now that will expire in May coming up. So we're kind of having a shortened year right now. So all of the data was right to the end of the expiration date on July 1, which, that's always from our end, that's the most complete data set because they are trickling in, up until the very end.
that's the one that was loaded in, or was that last year's? You're saying?
That I think is the one that was loaded in.
The new one.
Yes,
Yeah.
the most, we wouldn't do the one right now because they're literally putting in renewals as we speak.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
as soon
kinda
as you get it, as soon as your update is even close to being done, we can load that.
Yeah.
If you get more information, we can always just refresh it.
But it's not going to go back in time, correct? I don't.
Well, you
think-
gave us a historical. We do have, there were inconsistencies with the historical format and the current format we can work through, but we really haven't spent a lot of time in that until we had some working session, but we can do the trend. If we can align the data on the historical versus the current formats.
Yeah, we kind of had different fields and
Yes.
different databases over different
Yes.
years.
Yeah.
That
And from a data perspective, if the data is not the same, then. you
It
probably have to-
takes
yeah.
massaging.
But it's probably not a big deal, but it'll take some work.
Yeah,
But we will have the current, and if you got the new one, and if the new one's in the same format as the last year's, at least we
which
got,
it will be.
yeah, we'll have a couple of years pretty easily.
And the other components are the Charleston County records, which are basically a year old, right?
Kind of always a year in
Yeah,
arrears,
they're a
pretty
year
much.
old.
Yeah,
And there's nothing
Not-
to do
not a
about
lot.
that. It's just,
not a lot changes in a year, but I guess if you're you know.
And
the-
like,
the-
like I said about the app is, if we wanted to do a refresh, I don't, like I said, if the velocity of change is minor, you might want to do one every quarter or every year. That's an easy upload. Just
Yeah.
refresh it, especially if the data is relatively clean.
And would our expectation be that, because it's in the comprehensive plan throughout this kind of improvement of data tracking and is the expectation that it'll be ongoing? That
If that's what you want, no.
that's what we can afford?
That's gonna be, yeah, that's all. It's not a big deal.
It's, it'll be one of those things that will probably kind of sit and simmer for 2 or 3 years and it won't get a lot of activity, but then, inevitably a time comes up when people are just clamoring and super interested in it and it gets utilized on a daily basis and then, kind of like,
Well, you may,
It's kind of been
you
the
may find
trend.
you want to use it for the, the sewer or the septic, any of the information that's in the record, you can use. There are probably more possibilities than just short-term rental with the data that's been loaded.
yeah.
And that's up to us or whoever the user community is that they want.
Well, I think that's a good update.
So do we want to schedule a orientation session at some point? Maybe that's
So-
a to-do and we can do that in the next couple of weeks
So-
or.
For just us. You're
Yeah.
talking about for the commissioners.
So our normal, and we'll get back to a more routine schedule. Hopefully, but our regular meeting is basically in 2 weeks from today. Would that, do you think your folks would be available?
Sure, let
to
me
do
try
that?
to arrange that. And if we
Maybe
wanna-
have that as part of our next regular meeting?
That would be fine, or if we want to set up a separate session, it's up to you, it's up to the commissioners.
I think that timing would work.
I'm fairly flexible, really.
Okay.
Why don't we
So-
plan on just doing it in 2 weeks? I wouldn't think there's a need to do it next week, and if you don't do it next week, then
Is it appropriate to, perhaps I just reach out to Scott and say, hey, what are you doing today? Can we look into this or, set
Well,
up?
what I'd like to do
timing with
is
you, or is it-
give those folks a little
Okay.
bit of, it's not a lot of notice, Sandy, but, what do you think? We'd probably need you guys an hour and a half?
Yeah, a little over an hour.
Yeah, maybe a little over an hour to get kind of oriented on it, and it's a pretty informal
Okay,
session, so.
all right. Well,
Why-
yeah, I
you
don't
want me
want
to
to
get
burn,
back to
I don't
you?
want to burn time up.
But why don't I get back to
And
you
then-
all on some time slots? If you want to do it, we don't, I guess what I'm saying is we don't have to wait the 2 weeks and we don't want to burn a regular meeting on it.
so do you think is it possible with your people to have an orientation and then kind of have meaningful results at the meeting? I guess if that was possibility, that would be
Sure.
kind
I-
of people
what I
have
would-
their,
Maybe I'm just asking the group here, should we define what it is we think is going to give us information that is going to get us to a conclusion?
yeah, that's
Yes.
been the
Yeah,
golden,
That's what I think, yeah.
that's
I think
been
we
the,
need to
Do
define
you want to
it
see the
now.
date? You want to see the tool first and then we can define what those metrics are to come to a conclusion, and I don't, I've got some ideas. I'm sure everybody's got a different view of, what kind of information or measures do we want to look at and how do we want, there's probably not a one size fits all, slice and dice the data. That way we're not just randomly going in and looking at all 4,000 records.
yeah,
We may want, I'll give you an example. So maybe we want to say, let's look at all of the short-term rentals in the commercial district versus the residential district, because if it's in the commercial district, does it really make any, there's really not an impact to the residential section. And then within the residential section, we can go up and down the neighborhoods and anywhere we want to see where the density is. Those kinds of things.
yeah.
And we may find that, there's a lot of places that there's no issue or it's low density, and others we may have higher density, which might be, raise some questions, those kinds of things. That's all doable with the tool.
Yeah. That's, I guess, looking down the road at the ultimate deliverable, I am thinking that we're gonna, on kind of issues past, we've generated basically an assessment, kind of a time-stamped study of, at this point, there was, these are the trends that we acknowledged and saw and found. These are the key pieces of data that we discovered, and so kind of identify the highlights that came out of the process. And then I guess the hard work is translating those highlights into a recommendation for council to enact something. So, generally the process and the discovery of things through that process is what leads to some type of recommendation. So I'm hopeful that if we keep kind of digging, the answers or the recommendations will kind of rear their head through the process.
I noticed as kind of an offshoot of what we're talking about, that there are traffic count meters now out. And it got me thinking, last time I remember the traffic counts being done, Chief Buchanan had done those. Do we still have access to those?
No, Chief Buchanan got very kind of granular with every lane in, every lane out. And over time that, we had them embedded in the asphalt, and I think they, over time, they either got to a point they didn't function or they got paved over. Something happened to them. And little by little, the amount of data that we get has kind of dwindled to pretty much we now just get the DOT data, which is only, it's kind of mass on, and I guess I think you can kind of get it down to a daily count, but I mean, Chief Buchanan had it.
I sent you a link to the DOT website that keeps up with the traffic count. So they've got, I guess, sensors on Palm Boulevard, this direction, that direction, and then what comes over the connector and what goes over Bridge Inlet.
Yeah.
I think that's what I remember.
And can you get it down to kind of hourly?
Yeah, they'll actually get a monthly
You get it?
report of how many cars per hour, I guess is how they base it.
Okay.
So I sent you the link to send out. I
Okay.
came across that a couple of days ago.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I don't know that I need it down to the hour, but I think it would be of value in a bigger scheme monthly to show the trends.
So David, could you get it into a spreadsheet that you could kind of analyze?
I'll take a look at it. I mean, like I said, it's a DOT website, and they've got, I guess they have sensors that they collect
Yeah.
data on a constant basis. It's updated.
Could
I
you?
didn't either. It's like-
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I sent you the link to send out, so.
Okay. I don't remember seeing that, but that's.
Well, I just sent it when I sat down here, remembered I hadn't sent it to you.
Oh, just now. Oh,
You got it.
okay.
Whatever goals you got.
Okay. David, would you mind just kind of pouring through it and seeing if you could, if you can get kind of monthly, weekly,
Yeah.
meaningful
I'll see what I can get out of it.
information out of it? To keep kind of everybody from,
It was pretty, like I said, from what I remember, it's pretty high level, but it's still
yeah.
kind of see the seasonal trend.
Is
during
it-
the summer.
Does it go, how far back does it go historically? Did you happen to look? I'm just curious.
We,
Couple of years.
Oh, okay.
well,
Great.
we will have still Chief Buchanan's, there will be some record of that granular level data from 15 years ago. And, so it might be, we probably can't get it consistently over all 15 years, but we could probably have kind of a time check 15 years ago and compare it to today. If we can find a common thread between the two points of data. Might be interesting to see. Sandy, could you give the group kind of a overview of your feelings on occupancy levels through the year, through the course of the year?
Yeah, I sent out some data on our monthly occupancy. Don't let any of the competitors see what we do. I think it's, maybe reaching farther, but I think this is fairly typical of what others are seeing. And you see the lines are pretty close together. I have to stop and look back at it. You saw a bump in 2020 near the end of the year, September, October, and November, and 2021 very similarly. And without getting into too much detail, some of that really could probably be attributed to COVID.
You think?
And some of it actually has to do with a lot of properties transitioning out of the vacation rental pool into second homes. So as our inventory dropped, of course, our occupancy continued. And arguably, I can't defend this with data, but about the same number of people and vehicles, just fewer homes to rent. So we had higher occupancy. So you have to be careful with occupancy in terms of what I just mentioned. Looking at those things.
How's that calculated, Sandy? Is that occupancy of days, units, or what's I'm just trying to understand what is the actual calculation
Yes, and
based on?
it's if a unit's available 7 days or 30 days and only rents for 15, then it's 15%, 50% occupied.
So it's no indication of the number of people really. It's the
Absolutely not.
It's how many weeks
figured
were
that.
open
Yeah, I
versus
figured- I
occupied.
figured that. I didn't know if it was like, if you have 200 units and it's 98% occupied, does that mean 196 units were
Rented.
rented for the whole month?
Yes, and I have to quantify again, that's a good question, because some of those are owners that were here during COVID that came in and, they left New York City and came down here to their rental home. Yeah. So it isn't all rentals, but the vast majority, of course, are.
So if it's
I don't have that breakdown.
if it's occupied by the owner, that would
It's
show up on
occupied.
here as occupied.
Again, I didn't want to get, to your point, too granular and, really show you my book of business.
Oh, this is
but,
good. Yeah,
very
this is
good.
good.
Trying to be as generic, but to the point that, COVID had an impact. 2021, I think we're still dealing with some of that, as well as a reduction in inventory, as you're seeing in the numbers. And I think that's been validated last night in Ways and Means. Did not Debbie Scruggs announce that there's been as much as a 2% decline in 6% properties, meaning 4% properties have increased in the community? But that won't be reflected till the end of your rental license cycle, if
See any
that's
new- We see how many new
reduction.
short-term rentals there are, licenses, right? Whether that stays constant.
Yeah, if the group getting squeezed is second homes or short-term rentals. Yeah, if
Yeah,
the
that's
number,
the
if the
unknown.
number of permanent residents is going up, are they equally taking from short-term rental pool and the second home pool, or is it? But we will get to that. Yeah, eventually. It's interesting. The pie chart will continue to kind of change.
Market conditions are market conditions and they change. And it's, I think my occupancy shows that it's been fairly regular, other than some explainable blips and the September, October is a funny one because of storms any given year. I
Yeah.
think there's a yellow line there. 2018 was a storm. You see it go down for the occupancy.
This says Sandy with the exception of January. I'm sorry, with the exception of February, 21 is the highest occupancy you've had in all of the years.
Yeah, with a few exceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, exception of February.
And again, is that a trend or is that just because of the spring?
Don't know, yeah, COVID, that pent up demand or what, yeah. Yeah, most of the folks I know that have rental properties, they were booked solid for the 100% for the summer.
So Sandy, you mentioned it, but I'm trying to figure out if I don't think that it's on this sheet. The drop in inventory,
Mhm.
that's not shown on here. So basically, it could be, theoretically, it could be 80% of 500 units would show up the same as 80% of 200 units, correct?
Yes.
Percent.
Okay.
If,
It's a-
yeah,
just a-
if I had 150 people coming to rent 200 units in any given point last year, I still had the same 150 people renting 189 units or what have you. So that occupancy is higher now over the whole of the inventory that we have.
Yeah, so I mean, if we had units across here, that would tell us.
But he's not gonna tell you.
No, I understand. I understand, I
Is that too
understand.
much, Sandy?
No, yeah. Now I understand.
That's a step
We
too
understand,
far.
that's good.
383.
Wink, wink. No, that's not right, Scott. Yes,
that helps.
correct.
No, with the exception of 20 and 21, I'm surprised how consistent they are, quite honestly. So that's good to see.
So why is September less than October? Did you say,
Oh, just
just going back to school, everybody's got,
only in 2018 does that yellow line is 2018 in September, you see it, or October, I'm sorry, it flatlined down below the peak that you see up at the top with the
Yeah.
other colored
I mean, it seems very,
years. That was a storm. I can't remember.
any idea
which
why
one we ran
September
away from.
though is less than October
Historically.
historically?
School
It is spring.
starts, so you
So
have a
everybody-
little
you-
blip, you have a
Down.
kind of a rubber band effect. and
Yeah.
It slows down and picks back up. So looking at the whole of the month, first 2 weeks, let's say we were only at 50%. And the last 2 weeks, we could have been at 75 or 80, whatever. We weren't ever that high in September. 70%, yeah. So again, there's a lot of information behind the curtain. My intent really was to show the trend is relatively the same, even in 2020. It's slightly above the rest of the years. And 2021 arguably is gonna be right there with it.
2021 is consistently pretty much every month, the occupancy
higher.
is
And again, without giving up the ghost, it could be the same 150 people that came in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. I just don't have as much inventory. So my occupancy is gonna show higher.
Can you give us any indication without getting behind the curtain? What's 2022 starting to look like?
Good question, and yes, I can. I have to go back and look. I don't have that memorized.
I mean, does it seem like
available.
it's going to be solid up or down or?
I don't know. What we push hard for is that people are here now. We give them a little incentive to, and nobody that's in the business knows what we do. Book now for next year's July 4th. Book now for next year's, October 1 to the 7th.
Hey, when we rented from you, we couldn't get out the door on that last day without re-signing for the next year.
Yeah, no, we try and make it worth your
And
while.
we did, yeah.
Thoughts, questions?
This is good.
Just another cog in the wheel.
Sandy, there, and I think we've asked this before, but there would be no way. There is no count on occupants. I mean, is there a way to get people? I mean, can you kind of theorize? If you took the occupancy, if you took the people in the house allowed by the law, and then you kind of overlaid the percent of the units occupied, I mean, could you kind of get to a good theoretical population on a given weekend in your mind? Do you feel like if
It's
they
not-
felt,
It's not something that is easily attained through any kind of a dashboard or software.
would you ever even capture it? I mean, do you know if a place allows 24, if they only have 12 in there, would you ever really know that?
No. No, because it's not required. I know other communities, it is required that you list there all the occupancies. Some of the condominiums around the country, because of fire codes and other things like that.
Keep
rental
The building
regulations
overall,
Require
yeah.
occupants to be listed.
You have a feel for, like, say, if it's a 5-bedroom house, roughly how many, what's an average that people might put in there? Is it 8 people, 10 people, 12 people? I mean, that might be,
It varies, and it has to do with the familiar status of the occupancy. Mom, dad, and 3 kids. Well, there's 4 bedrooms. Maybe they're gonna have company come, or, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, grandparents. It's across the board.
But is it, I mean, I would assume from my limited traveling, if I am gonna rent a place, I basically size the place according to the number of people I'm gonna be traveling with. And it would not, I wouldn't rent a 5-bedroom place for 2 occupants. I mean, is your
Right,
kind of hunch that that is the
I
starting
think our
point?
bigger homes absolutely probably are 80–90% occupied. Again, you have 1 child in a bedroom where your count might be allowing for 2 occupants. I shouldn't say child, probably in trouble now. But my point is that
we won't cancel it.
that I think that you're probably looking at a maximum at 12 people in a 5 or 6 bedroom home. Doesn't matter. That's a newer license. And are you getting 12 people is what you're asking? I think from time to time, absolutely,
Yeah,
but not every time. So I think you could probably factor that in.
Well, the reason, even if we came up with a option or scenario that said, hey, for a 5-bedroom, you're gonna have this many average occupants. For a 6-bedroom and a 3, whatever that is. You take, since we've got the data now on hospitality rooms for all of the properties in the data, come up with an average, and we know that per unit. So we got the units, we've got the bedrooms per unit. Come up with a, have Sandy or anybody, we can just pick one, try it out, see how it works, match that up against the occupancy. You can almost tell, you can multiply that across the entire island and say, hey, occupancy times hospitality rooms times average number of people in those rooms. You can basically tell how many people, you can come up with at least some kind of a scenario of how many people are coming on the island every month. It's just be a straight math.
So the number of people that can fit in a Suburban versus the number of people that are getting into a Fiat 500 to come on vacation. There might be a half a dozen Fiats at a 6-bedroom house where there might only be 2 Suburbans.
I wasn't going to traffic, I was going to people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
how they get here, you're right. We don't know that, we don't know that.
That's where my mind went.
Traffic, you
was
went to traffic, yeah. You went to traffic.
Yeah.
well, I mean, I think it's good information, and I think and I guess my train of thought's going the same direction as Scott is, if you take that occupancy limit and you can kind of, or occupancy trend, and you come up with an additional kind of estimate. You know, it's not going to be an ironclad, you're not going to know it, but you could probably have a good estimate of the amount of, how close they are to an occupancy limit, and kind of come up with some ideas of population on weekends. And if you layer it over with the size of the rentals today versus the size of the rentals over time, you know, is it truly going up, or is it not? I mean, it sounds like the number of rentals is going maybe down slightly. The size of rentals may be going up slightly. I don't know. But if you can kind of overlay all these bits of information, you may get some useful
How-
trends in there.
How is the vehicular number factor, Douglas? I forgot.
It's
What is-
it's based on, also on the number of bedrooms. It's kind of half the occupancy,
Okay,
roughly.
so a house, a new property coming online, max is at 12 occupancy, mostly gonna have a 6 vehicle.
Right. It's not exactly that, but it's a rough correlation.
Is it-
It's
Square footage?
no, it's per bedroom.
Oh,
I
okay,
think it's one per bedroom. I think it's
okay, all right.
and the other one's two per bedroom, but then I think it's minus the +2.
So if I've got a 4-bedroom house, my max is 10 people, right?
Well, you get into all these grandfathering things as to whether
Well, yeah,
it
no, I
used to
mean,
be,
a new license coming
Yes.
online.
that's
Yeah,
correct.
okay.
So, on your desk when you came in, this list is kind of the working list that we started I think back in July, when we started on this. And I'm gonna keep it up to date and use it as kind of our task tracking tool. And I don't think we need to get into any of it at this point, but it's gonna be just the tool to keep track of what we are, what bits of information we're looking for, trying to get, and if we've gotten it, or if we're working on it, kind of what our status is. So we'll start to use that as we pull things together. And I would like, you know, as we start working with the new tool, if we can add tasks to the sheet. And eventually, like I said, I want to kind of be able to bundle it all up into something that somebody who hasn't kind of been in the room for all of the discussions, we could just hand it to them and it would be useful information. And then behind that are the various things. They're all things you've already seen, but we just kind of, I felt like it had been a while since we had looked at it or talked about it. So just kind of wanted to give everybody the point in time and what we have at this point. So I don't have anything else unless there's anything anybody else wants to talk about, or like I said, I hope to get this moving a little bit quicker than we've been moving on it, but I think we're in good shape. Any other comments or concerns, points? No?
But I want to go back just quickly to the way you started the meeting, which was the purpose of gathering all this data is to come to some objective. And I think it's great that we're looking at systems to manage data better and hopefully capture data better. But the data, I want to go back to what is our objective here. And we're starting to get a fair amount of, we may have better tools to play with this stuff, but we're not going to, this is the data. It's starting to come in now, which shows what's going on with rentals, what's going on with rental license, what's going on with occupancy. So I just want to keep that in mind. I'm saying I have an answer now, but you know, to think a month from now, we're gonna have different data, we're not. The data is the data. And it's starting to show a trend that, you know, whatever it is, business license has been flat for 10 years, occupancy is the same every year. The number of new houses that got converted into rentals is declining. So, I mean, the data is starting to show something, and I think we all should start thinking that the new model isn't going to change the data.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll give us more detail probably on the, but
You have to be able to manipulate it better, play with it better, manage it better, but the data, you know, if you look at the list of things we were looking for, it's starting to come in, and we're starting to see what that is. And I know this started many months ago with some feelings that we had a problem. Well, the data is starting to come in, and we need to now say, what was our objective? And are we starting to see data that shows a trend one way or the other?
yeah,
I agree with Stephen. I think we got to define, you know, what is it that we're going to, if there is an issue, what is the issue and where is the issue?
Right.
Because looking at the island in totality isn't going to define anything. It's going to be a pile of, it's just
Exactly.
going to be a pile of data. But, you know, I think we can, this gets back to what is it we're going to try to measure and what are we going to try to answer? You know, we may find that if we take the scope of the data that we've got and say, look, you know, and I think we have to have this conversation at some point soon. You know, do we want to say, hey, out of the, make up the number, if it's 5,000 hospitality rooms, or 3,000 of them in the commercial district, and you know what, that's okay. We really don't want to, we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. That's a commercial district. It's a rental area. That's where the hotels are. That's where the single unit properties are. Do we need to spend a lot of time there, or do we want to look at the density and what's happened in trends in the residential areas? And in the residential areas, do we have hotspots that are causing maybe some members of the community to say, hey, I'm getting overrun here with rental properties? And then the question is, well, what do we do about that? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. So go ahead. You're going to say something.
Well, I was just, you know, that information to me, finding the hotspot areas. I mean, you can't change that unless you're gonna do some kind of spot. I don't even know how you change
Well,
that.
I think that gets to some communities have looked at, and believe me, I'm kind of agnostic on this. I don't know what the answer is. We live in an area where we're surrounded by rental properties, and it is what it is. But you know, some communities say, hey, you know what, there are certain levels of rental properties that are allowed for the commercial districts, and then certain densities are allowed in the residential districts. Now, does that mean that, okay, if I'm in a district, an area right now that's deemed residential, and I've got 50%, you know, rental properties, and, you know, other communities, if we benchmark against it, they may say, hey, 20 is the max, like I think some of them in South Carolina. Does that mean you're going to ratchet back to 30? You're going to ratchet 30% back out of my area of the neighborhood? I don't think so. I mean, you got to, you know, that's where the hard conversations come in. Well, what do you do about it? And do you do anything about it? And do you do it over time, or you not do anything at all? I think that data, though, is important to have.
I
And I
agree
think
with
then we
that.
present that, you know, it's not for, we're like Douglas and I, you know, our job is to get the data, package it, and send it to the council to decide what they want to do with it, and recommendation perhaps. But, you know, we can really refine. We're in a position now, I think, where there's never been any data. It's been people coming in and complaining about a rental property specific. Now we've got the information. Then the question is, what do we do with it? How do we do it?
I mean, we're trying to quantify something that's been very subjective.
Exactly. And
You
we
know,
can do that
I
now.
feel this.
Right. So we
So
can do that.
whichever way you feel.
Right.
And without prejudicing the data by having an assumption beforehand,
Exactly.
you know, which is what we're trying to avoid, being in an apolitical body.
Right.
You know,
So, do we really care about the commercial district?
It's
And
conversation.
what is that?
oh, it's just,
What, I
well,
was gonna say, how do you,
to the point, it's good
Oh.
to know, you know, because you do have condos here, and heck, Wild Dune's a whole other open can of worms.
Well,
Where
and
you do
that
have
was,
densities of rooms and buildings and area. You know, to me, just again, intuitively, it seems that there would be hotspots of locations of rentals, good, bad, or indifferent. Oceanfront tends to be more of a rental spot than say the leeward side of the island, although even that's picking up because of people with boat access to the waterways. But, yeah, so I think it impacts neighborhoods most when it's occurring, in the center of the island, a forest trail, which, to me, it doesn't make sense to develop a beach rental there anyway, but to each their own. I mean, it's a free market. Somebody wants to try it and make it work, more power to them, I guess. But, and then, and then I tend to agree that, I thought for years that there ought to be percentages of those areas that could be dedicated or allocated, if you will, to rentals. Because, just sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And I did renovate a house a couple years back in the middle of the island on 32nd. I never thought it would be successful as a rental. And he's telling me, it was a 4-bedroom house. And maybe that was just the right formula. I think he got one. But it's like, why would somebody want to walk, 2.5 blocks to the beach when, for a few extra $1,000 a week, you can be closer to the ocean if that's what you're here for.
Well, I think that was the operative word right there, a few extra $1,000.
Yes,
They just can't
right.
afford it.
And then you put a pool in the backyard and
It's the
people forget they're here at
amenities.
the ocean
Right.
anyway.
It's the
Yeah, and
amenities.
then a lot of other beach communities up and down both coasts, waterway would seem close to the beach.
Yeah,
So
salt
that-
tree.
yeah, so the
Exactly.
demand here is just, I mean, you just don't know.
So I asked the question because I wanted to get to some of what you were alluding to, Ron, is do we care about wild dunes in the big scheme of things as a resort?
From
Is
a
that something we
traffic
want
standpoint.
to work with? Do we want to spend time on the commercial district, to your point, Scott, or should we identify it and perhaps put it aside?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a conversation
focus-
for the
and
team
fo-
here to say, yeah, I mean, the application is we're gonna be able to, I mean, we can already geomap the entire inventory right now. We may say, hey, you know what, 10th Avenue, our oceanfront down here, between this and this, there's out of the 5,000 hospitality rooms, and we got 2,000 of them there. Do we really want to spend a lot of time analyzing that because it is what it is and it's a commercial district? Scope it out. Or just identify it and say, the commission has determined that that's a commercial district. It's not a residential area, neighborhood area. We're gonna, we know what the data is, we're gonna scope that out. And then, or put it over here and say, well, there's no issue with that. And then, we would not potentially recommend any changes to anything in that commercial district. I mean, those kinds of things. I mean, I'm just,
Yep, yep.
yeah, it's a
So,
hypothetical.
second part, if you will, of my question really is, occurred to me with your, I don't know the capabilities and what the data might be that we have in there right this minute. Can we look at what we determine is the commercial district versus, let's say, the residential district and see if there's been a change in the growth pattern of one versus the other? Are vacation rentals trending out of the commercial and into the residential?
I don't know where the data that we have, Sandy, because it's a one shot with the property records. What we
Okay.
can do though,
Yeah.
is we can identify the age of those properties that are in rental. So if there's a bunch, we can say, hey, show us all rental properties that have a build date or CO date or whatever the property record date is of 2015 and.
How many have a
and-
license?
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Compared
that have a
to our-
license, and we can plot that on the map and say, hey, you know what, these are the new,
But you would
within the
actually-
last 6 years or 5 years, these are the ones that have been added to the inventory.
But you would actually,
We have
probably be
that.
better is age license and say, how old is the license at that
Do
location?
that too, however you want to, however we
So-
want to do that. Yeah.
Right, so yeah, but we have less
that's the
good vetting with
Yeah.
aging data for the business.
Yeah, that's
license,
the
so
chart
Yeah,
you're.
exactly
yeah.
what we've already looked at.
Yeah, and we could,
But
I mean,
he's
we
saying-
can work the data. I mean,
Or it
we're
is.
just gonna need to-
Yeah. I
Graphic.
haven't looked at that.
He's
one
got the
closely.
10-year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So,
Sandy
Just
was-
chart it for, where is it moving or is it
Right.
still, is it static? And again, I go back consistent, it's not static, but I go back to the number of licenses,
Right.
you know,
So
It's
the,
interesting.
the discussion about the commercial district, in my mind, so the zoning doesn't allow basically any new
Units.
unit. So, and what's there was built there now probably at least 10 years ago. So I think the commercial unit is kind of what it is, and it's been that way for 10 years, and I don't think there's any way that it's going to change in the future. You know, you do have a new hotel in Wild Dunes, so I guess that's a little bit of a different animal, but
Not that
outside of Wild
anomaly,
Dunes, I
not
think
gonna
it's
happen,
very consistent.
They still
and
got 50 rooms.
Well, I think it gets to Sandy and Scott's point. I think once you plot where the licenses are, yes, you're gonna see the commercial district, you're gonna see, obviously, you have the hotel and others. And then you also have a slew of one-bedroom condos in that Wild Dunes, which I guarantee have a lot of short-term licenses. So
Right.
you're gonna have buckets where you say, okay, of the 1,500 business licenses, 750 of them are in these three buckets.
Yes,
So why don't we focus on the other 750?
Well,
Because
exactly.
these probably aren't gonna change. You
right.
know, so I think that's where the geographic plotting of the licenses will help in the new program.
And quote, they might not, I do recall, I think one of the things that Mayor Carroll was talking about in the early discussion, some of the other council members, that this is all about the quality of life thing, or quality of living. So, what we might say is that commercial district and those high density condo units that were made and built for rentals and all, those are sort of the out of scope. We want to focus on those things that may be potentially impacting quality of living kind of things. And we'll be able to identify those, we'll be able to identify location and densities on those right now. We can do that now.
So I would just kind of looking down the road a bit and, the idea of identifying hotspots, that has always been a challenge for, every planning commission that looks at this issue. There is always a hotspot. I mean, there is always oceanfront. And there have been, on several different occasions, the planning commission has thought through a zoning scheme that would kind of carve out those hotspots and leave them as hotspots, and then start adding protection outside of the hotspots. And it never goes well. I mean, it's always neighbor against neighbor of, why are you throwing me to the wolves? Why would we do that? So, I mean, and we've carved it up a million different ways, a million different times, and kind of talked about this idea of providing protection to one area that is not granted to a neighbor across the street, and it never goes well. For what it's worth, I mean, that idea has been, bantered around time and time again. Not to say that history would repeat itself. Maybe it could be done in a more creative way, but if we're truly thinking about kind of identifying hotspots and making tweaks for hotspots, that strategy's been problematic in the past.
Maybe we crack it a different way, or maybe there are other ways to look at it.
Yeah.
Well, I think
And
it's
the other thing is, this is not something I think that hopefully there's not gonna be any kind of a knee jerk. And if there's a solution, or if there's a desire to have a long-term solution, it might be a very long-term solution.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
And
Sullivan's
the idea is
Island,
to keep the balance.
Sullivan's Island outlawed rentals over 20 years ago, and they're arguably down to 50% of what they were 20 years ago with their rental licenses.
And I think isn't it sort of the desire to sort of maintain some kind of whatever the balance is, and I don't know what those numbers are, but the balance in the commercial district is maybe different than the balance in the residential neighborhoods.
So again, I go back to your report. So we just stop and say, as of today, or whatever our data, up until our data is current, what is that ratio now? Commercial, or I guess really we're looking at what is it? What's the residential number? And you have.
Kind of you're saying the third ratio? Is that
Well,
what you're-
no, of vacation licenses, the licenses that exist out there. how many are in, you know, the front beach of Wild Dunes, just generically?
Yeah,
That, you know, we don't, not interested in that number. Take it out of the 1,400 the licenses we have now. The front beach on Isle of Palms, how many, what is that number? I mean, and take it out of the, you know, the 1,400, and then that leaves everything else, you know, the forest trails, for instance, the Carolinas Ocean Palm, and then analyze those areas. As opposed to spending time with the big picture at 14, on my glasses, 1490, it's not 1,400. And focus on that, because I think that's where you're gonna get the noise from. Other than, you know, the traffic to those condos on the front beach, condos in Wild Dunes, and the hotels rooms.
Well, we'll have the data, you know, what is the density of rentals to residents in those front beach areas? I think we're gonna find it's gonna be a much higher density there than it would be in the residential. And the impacts in the residential, you're gonna have more impact or, I guess I would call it more interaction with the neighborhood people, and residents with a much lower density than you would on beach, because that's expected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think until we get that actual data, of seeing it, is it a problem that's moving, which is why it's being, or if hasn't changed, people are just getting more tired of it and being more vocal about, you know, the livability issues. Then it's, I guess, it goes back to, does council want to try to reverse, you know, that, I don't know if I'd call it a trend, because if we're stagnant, it's not a trend. So are we trying to reverse something that's happened over the last, you know, 20 years? I mean, I can't answer that question, but until we figure out, yeah, is it pretty much, you know, the same as it's been, just people are getting tired of, or are we actually seeing something changing that we want to
Right.
prevent?
you know, I've always, and just kind of dealing with it, I've always felt like there's been kind of a desire to keep things basically flat as they are, you know, kind of status quo is always good, but I have never been able to think of a way to not, you know, if there's not a trend, if there's not this kind of rush to get licenses, is there a way to creatively keep it flat without artificially impacting the trend? Because as soon as you mention a cap or a limit on the number, then it becomes this bizarre thing of people getting them, you know, just to have them and protecting some. So I've never been able to get around kind of the idea of how do you put something in place, but at the same time not start artificially influencing the numbers and making people convert to a rental that may not have, or get a license that may not even rent. Same exact thing, you know, going back now 20 years ago, the planning commission at the time, and Ron and Lisa, you probably were here, but there was this kind of idea of the houses getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's when things, the Florida area ratio of how big can your house be got implemented. And there was this kind of thing of, well, nobody would ever build a house over 7,000. So we looked at everything that had been built, you know, things got kind of up to the 56.6. Well, let's just all agree that we never want to see a 12,000 square foot house. So we created the limit, a ceiling at 7,000 square feet. Lo and behold, what happens for 3 or 4 years? Every house that gets built on the oceanfront is 6,995 square feet. So it's one of, you know, you kind of create, you build the field and they come to play, I guess, is the way it goes. So I don't know if there's a creative way to hold the line without getting into the natural trend that seems to indicate things are flat. The silver bullet, we'll call it the silver bullet. Maybe we can identify it. we also have the, and you'll see the artificial spike. When there was the grandfathering in 2010, we had this immediate rush. And the rental license number went way up because if you had a license on that date, you were forever kind of grandfathered with. So anybody who thought they may ever want their property to be rented came in and they got a license and honestly,
Signed up for 25 people to occupy their 2-bedroom home.
Yeah, I don't
well, I
think-
mean,
I was one.
it was still a formula of square footage
Yeah.
and part of that went away, but you could get an occupancy higher than 12. To this day, that 2010 list comes out every week. It's like, well, did they have? So they were wise to do it. I mean, it got them under the line.
But those are the exceptions. I mean, we're
Right.
gonna have that. The overall, what we're looking at, I think, is quality of life issue. Absolutely. Do I want a vacation rental home next to me? And quite frankly, I don't. And I don't think anybody really wants it. So how do we help ensure into the future that we're not overrun with them? Is there a way to reasonably do that? I don't know that it's been tried, talked about a lot in the
Yeah.
past, but
All right, we'll keep digging, keep polishing, keep digging.
so in 2 weeks, are we gonna have, you're gonna find out if we can have a group
Yeah,
meeting with
what I'm gonna
the
do actually
software?
is I'm gonna see if between now and the 2 weeks, I can maybe throw out 3 or 4 options to people to come to the Zoom session and get
Okay.
tuned up on this thing.
Okay,
If it's agreeable and, come and play around with it, see what we got.
So it couldn't be more than 3, because it would be a quorum. So, and if you're there, it would be 2.
Right, and David.
And it
I
doesn't need to
have already
be-
done it.
David, so if you want to go in groups of 2 with Scott,
Do I have to be there? No.
you don't have to be there.
I'll
You
be-
You're very
started this.
useful to be there.
So,
It's useful to have
well, then that would be 2 training sessions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2 different sections.
That's easy.
All right, so we'll try to do that before
Yeah,
our
let
next
me see
meeting.
if we can do that before the next.
And then maybe we'll,
What's the date of the next meeting?
the October 13th at 4:30. So if we're done on that, I would just report that on the priority investment element of the comprehensive plan, there is not a lot of drafting happening, but I will tell you that there is a huge amount of grant money kind of lingering in Columbia that the city as well as the Water and Sewer Commission are trying to kind of vie for. There is an allotted amount coming to the city that we know about, and we kind of are counting on that. And then there's this additional money that's at the state level. There is this Accelerate SC group that is advising the state on what they feel like that money should be used for. And it is generally infrastructure projects, which are priority investment element is, that's basically what it is. It's a list of all the infrastructure things that we think should happen over the long term. So it is sewer expansion, it's drainage infrastructure, which is what, there are other things that the Accelerate SC group are identifying to spend the money on. There's a lot of broadband stuff and other various things in there, but I think the city and the commission, Water and Sewer Commission, are hopeful that some of these massive ticket items, the expanding sewer is pushing 50 million. They already are starting the 15 million part of it, so they're going to have 35 million left to run the sewer lines. And that obviously has been the big hurdle to getting everybody onto sewers. Is a huge price tag, no matter how we divvied it up among the non-sewer, and it was an enormous cost. So, and then the same is true for drainage infrastructure. I mean, we have projects on the board. The prices have doubled just over the course of the design period, a couple of years. So those are kind of through the roof, and that really only gets us, once those are done, that only gets the drainage improved on the back kind of, third of the island. So there's a lot more left to do. Davis and Floyd is working. They now are under contract to begin the drainage master plan. So they're going to be identifying additional projects. So there is a lot going on in terms of funding out there right now. And it's almost so new and uncertain that it would be hard to write a plan to go after it, because it's kind of, it's playing out in real time right now. And we're trying to get it as kind of actively as we can. The city has reached out to our state representatives and just expressed and made a request for, in our situation, requested 4 million, which is the difference in the drainage infrastructure cost from when we started and borrowed money till today. And then the Water and Sewer Commission, they are requesting the full 35 million. What they're advised to do, I think they understand that if they get half of that, they would be very happy. So
Maybe we could dedicate some parking spaces to the state representatives on Boulevard.
Yeah. Have them quit going to Columbia tattling on us.
Don't go to Folly. Come down.
We're also engaging a grant writer to kind of that's involved in Columbia, and the council is trying to get kind of professional help at the Columbia level in terms of a lobbyist, a lobbying presence. So we are hopeful that money will be made available to the city and for some and various projects going forward. So again, not a lot of draftings happening on that element, but a lot is happening in terms of trying to get money in place. So it would be great if, some of these massive hurdles could be helped with the state money. But we will continue, that's.
Do we need to write some sort of a generic addressing the future?
Yeah, and that's kind of in there. I mean, we already have we had worked up a draft that just identifies the projects, identified the funding sources. So we're, we haven't gotten really to the strategies and goals, but we can. And really, I mean, from a workflow standpoint, I think our focus has temporarily been shifted to the short-term rental stuff. So I think we're fine in terms of timing to get that off of our agenda and dealt with, and we can get back to the comprehensive plan. Any questions on that or comments? We'll keep you posted on that. And as I said, I do expect that Davis and Floyd will start their work on the drainage master plan. And I know part of their work will be just kind of making site visits and holding a series of meetings to gather background. So I suspect that this group will be part of that. I don't know to what degree or when, but I think that they would.
What was their timeline?
I think a year,
Anticipated? Yeah.
about a year. And they have just finalized the contract.
Yeah.
So that project's underway. And I don't have anything else for the group.
Motion to adjourn.
unless Anybody else
We have a
does?
motion to adjourn. We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say
All right.
Aye.
Have a date and Bull's Day.
aye.